But this one gentleman, and it really worked well for him, was that we got a box, like a raised box, so it was about that high maybe, and put his plate on that, and that was enough to kind of lift him up a little bit. So things like that. So we mightn't always need to refer to the OT. We might be able to have a look around and see if there's something we can do ourselves. Although I don't know if the OT would be too happy about us taking their jobs. So that's another thing we need to think about. And also there's adults with intellectual disability. They may present with some primitive reflexes, and that may also affect feeding. So like I said, we may also need to work with other members of the team. Equipment is another big one. Maybe the use of adapted spoons or plates or cups. This can have a positive impact on someone's independence when it comes to feeding. So the equipment that I tend to use, or not that I tend to use, but that I noticed being used quite regularly in the service that I'm in, is plate guards, so that they're not spilling their food, because obviously their motor control wouldn't be, their fine motor control mightn't be at its optimal, so we need to be very careful that they don't waste their food. So plate guards is really good. Some people use the weighted knives and forks or spoons, whatever they can, whatever's kind of just to give them a little bit more weight to kind of help them to lift their food. Beakers would be a good one again if someone has poor motor control, or again if their positioning isn't great, so that you can get the drink into their mouth. Things like that. Pacing is a huge factor, I find, in adults with intellectual disability. It's believed to be crucial in the prevention and premature loss of the bolus from the pharynx and subsequent aspiration. It can also be noted that possibly 2 to 3 swallows per bolus may be required to sufficiently clear what's there, and or they may need to take, say, smaller boluses at a time, so maybe using teaspoons for intake rather than anything else. This is a really interesting one, particularly in the service that I'm in at the moment. So at the moment, the service that I'm in, it's houses, so it's individual houses, and there is between 5 and 8 residents roughly per house, and obviously enough staff to man that. So obviously dinner time, meal times, I imagine, can be quite hectic. And I find a lot of the residents and the service users, they eat very quickly. And I always just thought maybe it's a behavioural aspect that we need to consider. But believe it or not, a couple of the staff have said to me, independently of each other, that prior to HICWA and all of these kind of regulations coming into effect, that it wasn't a case of so few residents to one house, that everyone had dinner together and everyone had meal times together, and maybe there wasn't the amount of staff to monitor that there should. And the reason pacing became such an issue was because there was so many service users in one area and very little supervision, that it became a case that if you didn't eat quickly, you didn't eat. And so now that's what the staff are battling, particularly with the older residents, that they've lived for years in accommodation where they just had to eat quickly, otherwise they'd starve. Not starve literally, but they kind of had to eat quickly, otherwise they didn't eat. So that was a really interesting thing, and kind of frightening at the same time, that A, they were unsupervised, and B, that there was just there was so little monitoring going on. But anyway, I'm gone off on a tangent. I just found that a really interesting point, particularly in the service, and it's come back to me a couple of times regarding pacing. So when I'm saying we need to really try and slow a person down, be it verbal prompts, be it tactile prompts, hand over hand facilitation, almost wrestling the fork away from somebody, and then of course aggression and tension and things like that. So, but that's what you're battling against. You're battling against, fighting with these people, because this is the learned behaviour and possibly many years in that environment. And now you're trying to tell them, no, slow down. No one's going to take this from you. It's okay. So, trying to get that across. Another thing that can be modifying the environment. So this is the next one, that they're often involved with a large number of staff, both residential and day placements. Many people are dependent on carers for feeding to facilitate mealtime participation and interaction. So we really should be looking at them in all of the environments to see if there's something we need to do, such as considering the physical position of the person in the room. in relation to maybe the light, the noise, the heat. Are they able to sit with everybody else? Is it too much verbal noise, too much oral noise? Do they need less distractions? Things like that. That's all the considerations that I've documented and that are kind of within the research. They're the big ones. And like I said, pacing I have found is the biggest one in the service that I'm in at the moment. But looking particularly, there is a huge amount of adults with Down syndrome that populate the service I'm in at the moment, and just some considerations within that population particularly. So Down syndrome, as you know, is a syndrome and extra chromosome, and the characteristics of Down syndrome in relation to feeding, eating, drinking and swallowing difficulties would be down to hypotonia of the lips and tongue, and also of the pharyngeal muscles, slow development of oromotor function, tongue and jaw movements, then oral stage cramming, which is common. So again, that might necessarily be because of the environment that they were in, but obviously it's just this, maybe it's a sensory issue that they want that feedback. As I also said earlier, that adults presenting with Down syndrome, they're at an increased risk of developing Alzheimer's, which, as you know, has got another knock-on effect for the decline of a swallow. Adults with Down syndrome, I beg your pardon, can present with oral stage problems such as biting on utensils, tongue thrust, change in taste, delayed or uncoordinated movements, emotional or behavioural problems, food refusal, cramming, panic attacks, spitting, cramming food, unusual mealtime patterns or behaviour. Another thing that I forgot to mention about the anatomy of that is sometimes that there can be, again, because of the hypotonia, mouth held open at rest, enlarged tongue called macroglossia, and I find particularly in the older generation at the moment, a lot of them appear to have no dentition. So that's just over the last few weeks. I've had particularly a few gentlemen, the older gentlemen, and no, they've no teeth. So they tend to be on a minced and moist or a smooth puree diet, but managing free fluids, which is good. So they're the common themes that I have found in adults with intellectual disability. Again, as I said, I'm only in the service since April, and I'm not there. I'm there maybe once, twice a month. So I'm sure I still have a lot to learn about it. And I must say it's challenging, but I've really enjoyed it, and I'm enjoying it, and hope to continue to do so. Again, this is my first presentation, so it's probably not amazing, and I apologise for that, but hopefully by the next one I'll have found my feet and seen a few more of yours and taken some tips. And so if you have any feedback, I would appreciate it, good, bad or indifferent, and I shall see you all on the 1st of October for the CBT Day in Portlaoise, and I look forward to meeting all of you then, and of course roll on the Christmas musical. I can't wait. Thanks a million for watching. Talk to you soon. Bye.